Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
U.S. keeps Syria and Iran on terror list. Obama sends a secret letter to Sistani. And Iran's Basij attacks opposition leader. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
ناقلة النفط اليابانية أمستار غادرت ميناء الفجيرة اليوم بعد إصلاح الأضرار التي لحقت.
The Japanese-owned oil tanker Mstar left the UAE port of Fujairah today after completing repairs to damage caused by last week's terrorist attack, while in international waters near the Strait of Hormuz. Traces of homemade explosives were found on the tanker. An official Coast Guard source said that the investigation, which was conducted by special teams, has shown that the tanker had been attacked by homemade explosives loaded on a small boat that sailed near the tanker.
كانت محملة في قارب صغير اقترب منها وقال المصدر إنه بعد رفع العينات وفحصها من.
The source added that after explosive experts tested samples, it appeared that the tanker suffered damage to its right hull just above the water surface. The tanker had traces of homemade explosives, which indicates that it was likely the target of a terrorist attack. There were no reports of casualties or oil spill due to the attack on the tanker, which was heading to Japan.
The U.S. State Department's annual report on terrorism kept Iran, Syria, Sudan, and Cuba on the list of countries which Washington accuses of sponsoring terrorism. The report still considers al-Qaeda in Pakistan the #1 threat to the United States.
So that leaves only northern.
Iran and Syria remain on the list of countries sponsoring terrorism. Al-Qaeda in Pakistan remains the biggest threat to the United States. In addition, the growing power of African Islamic groups is a challenge to the security of the countries in the region. All this was concluded in the annual terrorism report released by the U.S. Department of State.
It has proven to be an adaptable and resilient terrorist group whose desire to attack the United States and U.S. interests abroad remains strong. We assess that al-Qaeda was actively engaged in operational planning against the United States and continued recruiting, training, and deploying operatives, including individuals from Western Europe and North America.
فعدد الهجمات الإرهابية في العالم خلال السنة الماضية حسب التقرير انخفض.
According to the report, the number of terrorist attacks around the world significantly decreased last year, and the death toll was the lowest in 40 years. The report indicated that armed groups carried out 11,000 attacks in the past year, in comparison to over 14,000 attacks in 2006.
عام 2006. وسجل التقرير تراجعا في عدد ضحايا الهجمات الإرهابية.
The report points to a decrease in the death toll of terrorist attacks since 2006, as the death toll was around 14,000 in the attacks last year, as opposed to 23,000 in 2006. The report, prepared by the Department of State in the U.S. Congress, affirmed that armed groups are seeking to recruit Americans inside the U.S.
تسعى إلى تجنيد أمريكيين من داخل الولايات المتحدة.
The assumption that Americans have some special immunity to al-Qaeda's ideology was dispelled, while our overall domestic radicalization problem remains significantly less than in many Western nations. Several high-profile cases demonstrate that we must remain vigilant.
وأشار التقرير إلى النجاحات التي حققها تنظيم.
The report points to the success that al-Qaeda has had in Africa, or more specifically, the coastal and desert areas, as well as Somalia. The report also exhibited al-Qaeda's attempts to launch attacks in the United States.
فالمحاولة الفاشلة للشاب النيجيري عمر الفاروق.
The failed attempt by Nigerian youth Omar al-Farouk to bomb a plane in the Detroit airport in the U.S. shows that al-Qaeda is not only threatening to harm the U.S., but pursuing to develop its technological capabilities in order to execute its operations. Abdul Qadir Balhaj, BBC.
BBC.
كشفت مجلة فورين بوليسي الأمريكية عما قالت
According to the American Foreign Policy magazine, President Obama has sent a secret letter to Iraq's high Shiite authority, Ali al-Sistani, urging him to intervene and convince the various political rivals in Iraq to form a new government.
يأتي الكشف عن هذه الرسالة التي لم ينفي البيت الأبيض.
The letter, which the White House has not dismissed or confirmed, comes as differences among the various political blocs continue to hamper efforts aimed at forming the new government, 5 months after holding the legislative elections.
يبدو أن التعقيد الذي يلف العملية السياسية في العراق قد دفع الإدارة الأمريكية.
It seems that the complexity surrounding the political process in Iraq has prompted the US administration to consider bringing the Shiite movement into the political scene. Foreign Policy magazine, which covers US foreign affairs, has released some of the details of a secret letter sent by President Barack Obama to the high Shiite authority, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, urging him to intervene and convince Iraqi political rivals to speed up the formation of the new government.
وإقناع السياسيين المتنازعين على الإسراع بتشكيل حكومة جديدة.
According to one of al-Sistani's relatives in the Iranian city of Qom, Obama's letter was delivered by an Iraqi member of parliament shortly after US Vice President Joseph Biden visited Baghdad. The Americans summoned al-Sistani and asked him to use his influence among Shiite parties and blocs and urged them to offer concessions.
نفوذه للتأثير على الأحزاب والكتل الشيعية ودفعها لتقديم تنازلات يأتي.
This news comes after months of efforts to bring about a solution to the government crisis failed, a crisis that has started to cause concern for the US president, who said that his plan in Iraq will change from military to a diplomatic effort.
المجهود العسكري في العراق إلى دبلوماسي كما يقول. بينما يرى بعض السياسيين.
Some politicians believe that the purpose of the letter is to mount pressure on Nouri al-Maliki's coalition to elect an alternate candidate for the post of Prime Minister.
لكن بعض المسؤولين الأمريكيين لا يرجحون أن يتحول الدعم.
However, some US officials doubt that al-Sistani, if he intervenes to oust al-Maliki, will shift his support to other candidates.
Joining us from Washington is our Al Jazeera correspondent, Nasser Al-Husseini.
What is the political objective of Obama's letter, which he sent to al-Sistani?
Feiruz, this letter is stirring more questions than providing answers here in Washington. The American side, whether at the level of political analysts or observers who are knowledgeable of Iraq's affairs, or those following news of the White House, as well as U.S. officials who are preoccupied with Iraq's issues, all have been tight-lipped about this. It seems that they don't want to issue any further details about the letter or its contents. However, the question that is being raised here in Washington is, why would the Iraqi side decide to release the letter to the media? What is the objective behind it? Why did the Shiite religious authority of Ali al-Sistani have to release the letter to the media? What was Iraq's intention behind it? It's unclear.
In another development, the British Guardian newspaper interviewed Tariq Aziz, the former deputy prime minister during the reign of the late Iraqi president Saddam Hussein. This is the first time that Aziz has talked to the media in 7 years.
Aziz said that if U.S. President Barack Obama withdraws his combatant forces from the country, Iraq will be left to the wolves.
Tariq Aziz added that the U.S. president must correct the mistakes of the former U.S. administration, which decided to occupy Iraq. He further said that former U.S. President George Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair have destroyed Iraq in favor of Israel, as opposed to their country's interests.
Aziz confirmed that Iraq doesn't possess weapons of mass destruction, and the objective of the former regime's claim was to counter Iran.
Seven people were killed and a number were wounded in an explosion that shook the Pardis petrochemical company plant in the city of Asaloueh in the Bushehr region of southwestern Iran. The explosion was caused by a gas leak. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad attended the opening ceremony of this factory last week. During the ceremony, he spoke against the Western sanctions on his country, saying that Iran will face these sanctions with this factory.
أعلن الرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما أنه لا يزال مستعدا للتفاوض مع إيران حول برنامجها النووي.
U.S. President Barack Obama announced that he is still ready to negotiate with Iran over its nuclear program. He stressed that the tightened sanctions that the UN Security Council has recently imposed on Tehran have started to pay off, according to U.S. media. During a White House briefing, Obama said that he saw signs that the Iranian regime has started to fully feel the implications of the fourth package of sanctions that were approved by the Security Council, and the harsh measures that Washington and a number of its allies have taken against it. In the developing internal Iranian crisis, confrontations broke out between the bodyguards of reformist leader Mehdi Karoubi and elements of the Basij, who tried to assault him while visiting a mosque in Tehran.
الزعيم الإصلاحي الإيراني مهدي كروبي يتعرض لمحاولة اعتداء.
Iranian reformist leader Mehdi Karoubi was subjected to a new attempted attack from the extremists, or more specifically, elements of the Basij. Conservative sources said that clashes broke out between the bodyguards of Karoubi and the Basij members who were trying to assault Karoubi in the Noor Mosque in Fatimi Square in central Tehran.
ذكرت أيضا أن حراس كروبي شهروا أسلحتهم لحماية الزعيم الإصلاحي وأنه مستخدم.
Conservative sources also said that the bodyguards of Karoubi brandished their weapons to protect the reformist leader and used tear gas to disperse people protesting Karoubi's attendance. Reformist sources completely denied the previous depiction of the event, saying that elements of the Basij confronted the reformist leader and chanted slogans against him and other reformist leaders, who repeatedly stated in recent days that the Basij has turned into a political and military party that oppresses the people.
وبينما يواصل 17 سجينا إصلاحيا إضرابا.
While 17 reformist prisoners continue the hunger strike they started last Monday, their families sent the religious authority in Qom a letter asking for help. In a rare criticism, these families denounced the silence of some religious authorities in the face of the injustice committed against the prisoners and their families. The families of the prisoners organized a sit-in in front of the Evin prison in Tehran and a protest in front of the Prosecutor General's office. These protesters were dispersed by force.
تم تفريق هذه الاحتجاجات بالقوة وسط أنباء عن تدهور حال 3 من السجناء الصحية.
Meanwhile, news reports say that the health condition of 3 prisoners have deteriorated. The Iranian intelligence agency threatened the mothers of the prisoners with arrest if they were to continue the protests. For his part, reformist leader Mir Hossein Mousawi warned that the tragedy of Qatar prison could be repeated. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei ordered the closure of Qatar prison after it was revealed that the prisoners were killed and tortured, besides other serious violations committed against them, shortly after the presidential elections last year. Naja Muhammad Ali, Arabiya.
العربية.
لا تزال قضية ترسيم الحدود بين شمال وجنوب السودان تحسبا للنتيجة التي سينتهي إليها استفتاء
The dispute over the demarcation of borders between the North and the South, ahead of the referendum on self-determination for the southern states, continues to overshadow the political process. This has prompted the two sides to refer their differences over the demarcation process to the presidency of the Republic. Meanwhile, the Demarcation Technical Committee announced that it has completed 80% of the demarcation process on paper. The committee said that the remaining 20% was delayed due to border dispute between the Bahar al-Ghazal region and southern Darfur.
The report, which was submitted by the chair of the Assessment and Evaluation Commission to the Sudanese parliament, indicated that several issues still need to be ironed out, including the demarcation of borders between the North and the South. The committee's chair attributed the lack of trust between the two sides to their failure to implement the National Reconciliation Initiative, as stipulated in the peace agreement.
Generally speaking, we must help protect the ceasefire agreement. The two sides must abide by articles of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Several articles of the peace agreement have been partially implemented. 2 articles have not been implemented at all.
Meanwhile, the Technical Committee on the Demarcation of the North-South borders said that it had completed nearly 80% of the final demarcation of boundaries. The committee has referred the disputed issues over the demarcation process to the Presidency of the Republic.
It's very likely that we'll be able to complete the demarcation of borders before the referendum is held. Once we receive the instructions and the drawings, the committee will be divided into groups and we will begin the process.
Sudan's ruling National Congress Party has warned against holding the referendum before the completion of border demarcation between the North and South. On the other hand, the People's Liberation Movement said that it will not postpone the referendum pending the completion of the demarcation process. As the train of peace approaches its final destination, many observers warned against delaying the demarcation process until the referendum is held, saying it's like placing a ticking time bomb on a border rich of oil. Muhayyeddin Jibril, Nile TV, Khartoum.
He is a journalist who wasn't born in a war-torn country. However, he has been attracted to those types of countries since he took up a career that revolves around conflicts. Robert Bill Fisk was born in Britain, specifically in Kent, in 1946. But he spent his childhood and teenage years moving around the Second World War's battlefields, listening to his father, a soldier in the British Army, recount war stories from what was dubbed the Great War for Civilization. The young Fisk was not convinced that his country waged war for the sake of civilization. He said he saw people around the world burning within borders that were demarcated by colonialism. The New York Times once described Fisk as the most famous foreign correspondent in the world. The British correspondent received a BA in English literature at Lancaster University and a PhD in political science in 1983. He began his journalism career by writing a column for Sunday Express, and after a disagreement with his editor, he moved to the Times, where he undertook his first foreign assignment as a correspondent in Belfast from 1972 to 1975. Fisk covered the events of the Portuguese Revolution, but the assignment that defined his future as a war correspondent was his work in the Middle East, where he still lives. He was a Times correspondent until 1988, when he came into the spotlight for publishing an article about the targeting of a civilian Iranian plane by American forces on July 3, 1988. Fisk then moved to the Independent newspaper, where he is still a correspondent. He has been living in Beirut since 1976, but the determined correspondent is one of the few who had the honor of witnessing most of the international conflicts since his journalism career began. He met Osama bin Laden 3 times, and in a tent on a hilltop in Afghanistan, he heard bin Laden's first direct threat against the United States in 1997. On that day, he told him, "Mr. Robert, we pray that God allows us to transform America into a mere shadow of its current self." In Lebanon, Fisk covered the civil war and the Israeli invasion. He was one of the first people to enter the Sabra and Shatila camps after the massacres. Fisk presented his testimony on our war in his book, Pity the Nation. In Palestine, Kosovo, and Algeria, bullets flew around Fisk, and he saw colleagues dying. He was at the front lines with the Iranian army as Saddam was crossing the Iranian border. The man who spent a lifetime fighting death on battlegrounds expressed his discontent with war in an article written about an Iraqi soldier who burned in the region of Al-Ahwaz. Fisk said, "I saw him over there, burning, a gold ring glittering on his left hand, bright with love for a woman who did not know she was a widow." In Afghanistan, Fisk fled alongside the remaining Taliban members during the American aggression on the country that has been torn apart by war. In Pakistan, a group of Afghan refugees assaulted Fisk. In his first interview after being rescued by a cleric, he said, "I don't want this incident to be considered an assault by Muslims on a Westerner. I understand the reasons behind their anger at the West. I too criticize American actions, and if I were in their place, I would have attacked myself." At the United Nations, Fisk listened to Colin Powell as he was presenting his alleged evidence on Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction. In Baghdad, the first American warplanes hovered over his head in 2003. Time has not managed to change his drive or his fearlessness. In a book about his observations, he says, "These images should remain in my conscience and will remain until I die." Fisk has received numerous awards, but his grand prize remains that, in these times of bias and extremism, he preserved journalism's moral side and was a witness, as much as he could be, to the truth. 2010 is far from over, yet the Middle East has witnessed a series of close encounters with major wars. What are Arabs afraid of? And why is Barack Obama's popularity sinking fast?
Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
Will it be a strike against Iran by the US and/or Israel? Will there be political upheaval in Egypt after Mubarak's reign? And will Israel invade Lebanon or Gaza? These are some of the questions that can be heard on the streets of Cairo, Amman, and Beirut. 2010 is far from over, yet we have witnessed a series of close encounters in the Middle East that created major tensions and pushed everyone to the edge. A war on the Yemeni-Saudi border, rapid deterioration of relations between Israel and Turkey over the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, skirmishes between Israel and Lebanon over the cutting of a tree, and the looming prospect of an attack on Iran, to mention a few. But what's really troubling is how fast attitudes have changed towards President Obama from a year ago, specifically in the period after newly elected Barack Obama delivered his New Beginning speech to the Arab and Muslim world from a podium at the University of Cairo in Egypt.
We have a responsibility to join together on behalf of the world that we seek, a world where Israelis and Palestinians are each secure in a state of their own, and nuclear energy is used for peaceful purposes. That is the world we seek.
Just yesterday, on Thursday, August 5th, a poll released by the Brookings Institute in conjunction with Zogby International revealed a substantial change in the assessment of President Obama, both as President of the United States and of Obama personally. According to the poll, early in the Obama administration in April and May 2009, 51% of the respondents in 6 Arab countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Jordan, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates, expressed optimism about American policy in the Middle East. In the 2010 poll, only 16% were hopeful, while a majority, 63%, were discouraged. The poll's results show another dramatic shift in public opinion on Iran's potential nuclear weapons status. While the results vary from country to country, the weighted average across the 6 countries is telling. In 2009, only 29% of those polled said that Iran's acquisition of nuclear weapons would be positive for the Middle East. In 2010, 57% of those polled indicate that such an outcome would be positive for the Middle East. So what's wrong with the earlier assessments that Arab countries were freaked out by a nuclear Iran? Unfortunately, the US government, and to a larger extent Western reporters, have been spoon-fed this information by intelligence apparatuses of certain despotic Arab regimes. No one bothered to ask the average person on the street this question. Although the poll was conducted before Obama's recent confirmation of the end of all combat operations in Iraq by the end of August, Arabs believe that the troubles of Iraq are far from being over.
On the streets of Baghdad, citizens expressed their concern that the Iraqi security forces may not be able to cope.
The Iraqi army and security forces are quite large in terms of number and equipment, as we see them in the streets. But the question is, if anything bad happens, will they be able to stand up to it? Speaking for myself, I cannot guarantee they will.
July has been a very deadly month in Iraq. Recently, Saddam Hussein's former Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz has accused the US President of leaving Iraq to the wolves. Last but not least, Palestine is still the issue, to borrow from John Pilger's title. The poll leaves little doubt that the major decline in Obama's popularity has a lot to do with the disappointment in the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Arabs have lost hope that President Obama will be able to deliver on his promises. I've been in and out of the Middle East 5 times this year, and if tension could be described as a cloud, you'd need a knife to cut through the one created by recent political events in the region. Everyone seems edgy and expecting war. President Obama must act fast to bring back some of the magic he had early on in the region with his messages of hope and change. Now he needs to deliver on real promises before it's too late. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report.
To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/news. Stay up to date on the Middle East. Follow Jamal at twitter.com/JamalDajani. The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible from support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news. Read our blog. Get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.